Between Life and Death by Jaclyn. Chapter 45. I awoke early the next morning, my hand slipping from underneath my cotton covers, reaching for Caleb's empty bed. The sheets were thrown over, spewed about, the way he'd left it the last night he slept there. I made a solemn wish as I slipped from my padded-down mattress that his sheets would always remain that way, just as he had always left them, unmade. The irony was not wasted that I used to get after him for not making his bed. Ezra did too. And now here I was, cherishing those unmade sheets. I scurried down from the loft, my stomach grumbling for the first time in 2 days. The house was quiet. Ezra's door was closed, signaling she was still asleep. Vaughn, of course, was nowhere to be seen. I wondered where he had slunk off to, although I had a feeling it was probably to do with his search for the crown of thorns. The fireplace had been recently stoked, and so I assumed he had not left that long ago. I warmed myself by the fire before I headed to the kitchen, a grueling 10 steps away. I tapped my chin and thought, my breakfast options limited. The potatoes had sprouted enough eyes I wondered if they were watching me. The onion bread, or rather, what was left of it, was a lump of green-blue mold. I threw it in the garbage, then glanced at the small basket of eggs. There were 6. That gave me a place to start if they weren't rotten. I lifted one, sniffed the shell. I hissed. Even through the shell, it smelled horrific. Sighing, I dumped those out too. A dangerous thought, occurred. I dared a glance at Ezra's shelves, dared a few steps forward. I stopped abruptly, remembering what horrors she stowed inside, and shook my head. I was hungry, but I wasn't that desperate. It was too late in the season to visit nature's produce store, and I didn't have it in me to go hunting. Ezra would probably be asleep for a while anyway. I glanced at my wicker basket, hung in its usual spot just beside the door, and decided to head into town. As I closed the protesting front door, the hinges a few swings away from calling it quits, I turned and bumped into something that felt like steel. Warm steel, leather and amber enraptured me. Vaughn, I said, looking up at him. Gods, he was tall. Inappropriately tall. Doorways must be a bit of an issue. I imagined he did a lot of ducking. That would be annoying, wouldn't it? No wonder people stared at him. Well, there was his height. And then there was the way he looked. Sinfully built, impeccably dressed, and his face, divinely made. Today, he sported a 5 o'clock shadow, which emphasized his chiseled cheekbones and masculine jawline. Vaughn raised one thick black brow, the one with the slit through it, and glanced at the empty wicker basket hooked on my forearm. Going somewhere, little goddess? Yes, to the village to get some food. Everything inside has gone rotten, moldy, or stale, I exclaimed, my stomach grumbling, furthering my claim. We both looked to my protesting stomach, eager to retrieve something to eat. I stepped around Vaughn, and began to walk towards the village. When I didn't hear his footsteps behind me, I glanced over my shoulder, and said, well, are you coming, or what? It wasn't a question, so I didn't ask it like one. So very bossy, Vaughn chastised playfully, his words steeped in his rich, decadent baritone. I made a point to roll my eyes just so he could see before I continued forward. In a few strides, or less, he easily caught up with me. That looks heavy. Let me take it for you, he purred, his voice coaxing a shiver down the length of my spine. His fingers, adorned in black and silver rings, slipped around the handle of the basket, brushing intimately against mine. I didn't need to look. I could feel his heated gaze sweeping over me slowly, sensually. Lady Light, help me. I heard him chuckle. The jerk. He knew what he stoked in me, like wind feeding a flame. A flame. That was one of the many things I had yet to process. On top of being water-cursed and dream-cursed, I now bore the curse of fire. Or at least, I thought I did. What else could that have been? My mind replayed the chopped-up memories from that night, of the shackles, and how I disintegrated them to ash, off the wrists of the conscripted men, off Caleb's wrists. Caleb. I stumbled upon the image of him lying there, his lifeless eyes staring up at me, and I choked, my mind recoiling like a stepped-on snake. I shoved the thought away and turned to Vaughn. Have you ever heard of someone having 3 curses? I asked, my voice breaking the steady hum of our shoes crunching leaves. He nodded. Yes, many years ago, it was not uncommon to have more than one gift. As you know, the gifts came from the old gods. They were passed down to the demigods. The demigods then bred with humans and passed those gifts on to their children. But with each generation, the bloodlines became more diluted. And so the curses did as well. That is why most people only have one curse now. I sat with that for a moment before I asked, why do you call them gifts? Because that's what they were always intended to be, Vaughn replied, his elbow pointed to the sky, the basket slung behind his shoulder. Sunlight filtered through the swaying branches, dancing across his face. The dark-haired warrior looked so casual, so carefree. I liked seeing him like this. Did any of the demigods have all 6 curs, gifts? I inquired, banking on Mr. Know-it-all knowing it all. He looked to the sky, returning the basket to his side. There is no demigod strong enough to possess all 6. He turned to me. However, there is one god that does. Really? I exclaimed, fascinated by this. I quickly realized that I sounded like a little kid. Which one? When he didn't answer, I glanced his way, grinning. My smile faltered. He wore that same pained expression as before. A hint of it, before it flashed away, that phantom mask slipping back into place. It was like a storm that came with a sudden onslaught of pounding rain, and cracks of lightning, and window-shaking thunder, visceral and real and raw, and gone as fast as it had come. But I was tired of not knowing. So I threw that internal door open, and chased after his storm. Why do you do that? When I ask you certain things or our conversation goes a certain way, it's like, I paused, trying to find the right words. There weren't any. No words in the English language could possibly describe that look. Tortured was as close as I could come, and even that seemed dimmed down. I licked my lips, trying again, without any idea what I was going to say. It's like, he cut me off, his expression as bleak as his eyes. It's you. What? I'm the reason you look like a steel blade slit you from hip to hip, and your insides are being ripped out? I half blurted, half seethed. My brow shot up as I repeated my words in my head. They weren't bad. I was getting closer, but still not quite there. Yes, it's because of you, vicious little creature, Vaughn remarked coyly as he held a spindly, barren branch up, allowing me to pass underneath, misjudging how low to duck. I got a wisp of my hair stuck. I tugged on it while the branch tugged back, snagging a few strands as a memento from its entanglement with me. The branch was as bad as Arkin and his obsession with my hair, all because it reminded him of his dead lover, a ghost that haunted him, even in her death. And now, Vaughn said I was the reason for his haunted expression, for his torture? Actually, you look much worse. It's a look akin to death. I paused, riding a wave of sudden emotion. Also, I'm insulted. Vaughn smirked at that. I'm amusing to you now, am I? I hissed as I tromped through a thick layer of leaves. The sound of crinkling destruction did wonders for my budding nerves. Vaughn caught my arm and spun me towards him, bringing our bodies a breath away from one another. Thick black lashes dipped slowly as his gaze raked over me, stoking my coals. His voice lowered, hitting that deep, decadent baritone. I find you a great number of things. My inner divine female stirred, awoken by the primal alpha male standing before her. But as quickly as that fire was lit, guilt exhaled, and blew it out. I was a horrible person. My brother was dead, and I was here, living like it was just another day. But it wasn't, and it never would be again. I can't do this, I whispered under my breath. I pulled away from Vaughn, and continued to the village. Joe's bakery shop was closed according to the crooked sign hanging on the inside of the window. But Joe's shop was closed on Mondays and Tuesdays, never Wednesdays. And I was fairly certain it was Wednesday, although the days had been a bit more blended lately. Also, it was early enough in the day that there was no way he would have run out of bread. Joe wasn't just like clockwork, he was the epitome of it. Unlike a lot of the vendors in this village, he was the one I could always count on, always on time, always there. So, naturally, I concluded that Joe's shop was open, and he'd simply forgotten to flip the sign. I slipped my hand into the brass handle, my thumb pushing down on the latch. It didn't open. It's locked, Vaughn stated, the basket thrown over his shoulder once again. It's just stuck, I exclaimed, jiggling the latch and the door. Neither of them budged. I turned to Vaughn, gesturing to the door. You try, he sighed, slipping his hand from his pocket. He wrapped his long fingers around the latch, and gave it a go. Nothing happened. Satisfied? He asked, taking a step back, his gaze drifting lazily to a soldier standing at the end of the block. No, I said, moving to the window. I pressed my hands against the glass, filtering out the reflective sunlight. I peered in. The shelves were overflowing with bread, cinnamon rolls, buns, pastries, various loaves, onion included. My mouth watered. All of it was stocked and ready for a day of sales. I waited, and waited some more. But Joe never came out. A sickening feeling swarmed in my gut. Shadow, walk me inside, I said, turning to Vaughn, shoving myself into his side. His brow darted up before his hand fell to the small of my back, and he guided me around the corner of the building, where no one could see us, and Shadow walked us inside. The divine smell of yeast and flour and freshly baked dough hit me first. The interior of the building, The neat shelves and tiled floors filled in next. Vaughn looked down at me, his lips twisting into a coy smile. Shall I add bread thief to your growing list of titles? I squinted at him. Turning my head and my attention, I called out, Joe.